Okay, I believe we're live, and there's a whole bunch of people already tuned in. Thank you for coming. John Longshore, Husa, Matt Chestnut, Brandt is here, Stigler is here, Richard Kerr is here. Thank you very much for stopping by. We are doing For King and Country again tonight. We will absolutely finish this. So I will not get to the, although I guess I could now. I wasn't going to get to the half-inch counters, just to the 3/4 inch counters, or 5/8 inch counters, because the other clipper was making too much noise. But I fixed that, so we should be good. Outreach is, of course, completely punched and ready to go. I am happy to report, so we might do something with that relatively soon. So what game are we talking about here that has the center chads, as it were? I think that's the new name for those, by the way, is center chads. I will give you a brief COVID update. About 3 or 4 days ago, I lost my sense of taste. I can still smell, I know, because I can tell when the dog has pooped on the floor. So that's good, I guess. Hasn't really quite recovered yet. The only flavor I can handle is kind of salty. So I'm eating more salty food than normal, probably. Otherwise, I feel fine. So, Lion of Khartoum, cool. Cool. Is that the one from Command magazine, or is it Against the Odds? So, Stuka Joe is in fact the man, by the way, before I forget to mention that, since he has been mentioned already in the chat. So I will remind everyone that this coming weekend, starting on, is it Friday or Thursday? I think it's Friday. It is, in fact, Friday. We have the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention that is starting. There's a whole bunch of events planned for that, so please check that out. I know that a number of new things have been penciled in the last couple of days. If you want to give a try to Hot Dry Season from Patrick Mullen and Legion of Wargames, upcoming game, for example, that has been added to the schedule. I am still doing the OCS Boot Camp on Saturday night. That will be broadcast here, and whoever wants to participate, whoever gets to sign up, I think we said 4 players, whoever signs up can actually push counters around, but everybody is welcome to watch. And then I'll try, like I did the last time I did one of these, I might save the video and produce an edited version that's hopefully a little less time consuming to watch than the previous than the live broadcast would be. Although the How to Use Vassal live stream was fairly condensed. I didn't really cut that much out of it. So still no puffy shirt today. So I haven't checked to see if it's full, but I'm not really surprised by that. But again, if anybody wants to get an OCS walkthrough with Smolensk, and tune in at 8 p.m. on Saturday. I believe it's 8 p.m. Brandt can correct me if I'm wrong. So that's all good. Otherwise, nothing really noteworthy has occurred. I do have some Mountain Dew here, which I don't really want to finish. But once you open them, you can't really keep it. So you're either going to drink it or toss it. And I'm too cheap to toss it. We are drinking Johnny Walker Double Black, which is very tasty, actually. I mean, the thing about... as a Scotch fan, I would generally prefer to drink single malts. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that a single malt is better. It is just more interesting because you're getting to see what that single malt expression is like. A blend is a blend that was blended by a professional to taste good, right? And to match the flavor profile of the blend, whatever it is, Johnny Walker or whatever. So this stuff is super tasty and considerably peatier than the regular Johnny Walker Black, for those who like a peaty whiskey, and I do. I'll have to bust out my backup Kalila next time. I could kind of taste the peatiness. There's not a lot of additional notes that I can pick up, to be honest. I can still get the smoke, but like any nuance. That's why I wasn't going to drink a single malt tonight. Because in fact, I should have probably lined up the benchmark number 8 tonight. It would have made more sense. So no, your answer is that I really can't taste it very well right now. So it was weird because I thought I was basically done, and appears not. Wife also appears to be not quite done with it either. So we'll see what happens. Let's hope. Robert, thanks for stopping by. Howard also, thanks for stopping by. The Johnny Walker Red is suitable only for mixing, in my opinion. I would not drink it by itself, and I have no compunction about drinking this relatively inexpensive scotch. I'm happy to drink Dewar's, for example. I'll drink it on the rocks, but I'm happy to drink Dewar's. But I wouldn't drink Johnny Walker Red neat. But everything else that I've tried has been good. I haven't tried any of the super fancy stuff. Yeah, that's why I'm saying benchmark number 8. It's not that bad, actually. What it is it's really young Buffalo Trace. I might have mentioned this before. Except here in Ohio, anyway, this is very state by state, of course, but here in Ohio, Buffalo Trace runs something like, last I bought one, is like $28 or $30 a bottle. But benchmark is like $9 or $10 a bottle. So it's like noticeably cheaper. You can taste the difference, but it is, I don't know that it's $20 a bottle less awesome than the regular Buffalo Trace. Mini bottle, man, that's a rotten Christmas right there. You get the little airline bottles at Jim Beam. Wow. You know, I almost bought for just on a whim. I almost bought one of those big like 12 packs of mini bottles of Fireball for stocking stuffers, and I'm thinking about it. I probably should have. That stuff is gross. Black Velvet. There's Black Velvet. Matt, I'm not sure I agree with you there, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with Black Velvet. Seagram 7, which is pretty much just as cheap, is very good with 7-Up, right? It's classic cocktail. I used to do 7 and 7s all the time. Diet Coke, warm in a dirty glass, served with a human hair in it. Lagavulin. Lagavulin is, Peter, thanks for stopping by. I like to, Lagavulin is pretty far from the smokiest whiskey around. I think there's like a measure of phenols that doesn't necessarily track to how smoky the whiskey tastes. I like to call Lafroig, which is my personal favorite Pete punch in the face scotch. I like to compare it to the taste of a burning tire. So, Wargame complexity. Stigler keeps us on target or what? Michael, I believe that older folks might drink Black Velvet, and the homeless, I believe, also enjoy it from time to time. So the topic I picked a couple days ago on this, because it came out last week, and I didn't come up with a better idea during the week. Let me preface that by saying I have spent a good chunk of today working on a Traveler video, which will be out tomorrow. So stay tuned for that if you are interested. So Wargame complexity came up the other day, and Avalon Hill had a 1 to 10 point complexity scale, and I think they only ever had about 3 games that were number 10 on Avalon Hill's complexity scale, to the best of my recollection. Those were Magic Realm. The Longest Day might have been as well, but Magic Realm was, and Third Reich, the original Third Reich was. So I want us to think about that, though, right? Because Third Reich came out in the 70s, I think in the 70s, and we're talking the original Rise and Fall of Third Reich. Came out in the 70s, and it was very complicated for its day. But let's take a look at a new game like, Time for Trumpets, right? Big game. big game, not a simple game, I wouldn't say. And I don't know what GMT complexity rating is on it. I suspect, to me, it looks like I'd call it a 2. It might be rated as a 3. Let's look it up since we're talking about that. And while we're at it, let's put out the tweets. Let's see what GMT says it is. So GMT on their 9-point scale says it is a 7. Okay? But is Time for Trumpets less complicated than the original Third Reich? Or is it more complicated? I would say, from what I've seen, I would say that it's more complicated than Third Reich. Maybe there's less bookkeeping, that's plausible. But bookkeeping doesn't necessarily correlate with complexity either. The point that I want to make is that our idea of what is a complicated game and what is not a complicated game. I mean, back in the day, right? And you look at this in 1980, what complicated games were available? They were either war games or role-playing games, right? Where now we have, games you go buy at Target that are complicated, fairly complicated games, right? Fighting Wings. Oh, okay, that looks interesting, actually. I was like, I don't know, that doesn't look that cool. And then I looked at it, and I'm like, I'm wrong. It does actually look pretty cool. So the point is that our idea of what makes a complex game evolves over time, right? At one point, I would have unhesitatingly said that Advanced Squad Leader is the most complicated game ever designed. Now, there are other games, right, that I think you could debatably put in the same category, like Starfleet Battles. However, but this is true of ASL as well, you don't have to know all of the rules for Starfleet Battles to play Starfleet Battles, right? You need to know the rules for the ship that you're flying. Well, that went fast. And maybe the rules for the ship that your enemy is flying. And then you have to know the basic core, like the power allocation and the movement and all that stuff, right? So, I mean, we have to temper our appraisal of how complicated a game is based on that. ASL has been successfully pared down to a rudimentary core with the ASL starter kits, and we can see that, hey, your game doesn't include any of the complicated terrain types or any weird scenario rules like caves or amphibious landings or airdrops or night or anything like that. You can get that down to a fairly manageable, and you don't have vehicles or anything like that, and they've managed to get that down to a relatively accessible level. Does that say something? Does that change our mind about the complexity of the whole game? Because you don't necessarily need to know the whole thing to play it, and not even necessarily to play it badly. I mean, if you want to make the case that ASL is an unnecessarily complicated game, I wouldn't argue with that necessarily. But I mean, it's always more difficult to make a simple game that does what you want it to do than it is to make a complicated game that does what you want it to do. So this is the challenge of that designers face, and I personally have never really experienced that as a wargame designer, but I've done enough design with RPGs that I would absolutely agree with that. Another thing that John Longshore mentions here is that if you have someone to teach you the game, particularly if they're good at teaching you the game, then boy, that's an enormous benefit to learning that game. There are other games, like ASL is one example of a game. That game, forget learning that thing from the book, man. That would suck. Now, I'm not talking about the starter kit rulebook. I'm talking about the big binder. Learning it yourself from the starter kit's a little less challenging, but that's why the starter kit is constructed the way it is. Hyder Mayor, thanks for stopping by. Hex to Hex, thanks for stopping by. So anyway, But Heidermeyer, that's actually why I looked into whether Tennessee whiskey is a subcategory of bourbon. There's the difference. The Tennessee whiskey is filtered through charcoal. That's what Tennessee whiskey kind of means. So it has all of the legal restrictions of bourbon, except that it's also charcoal filtered. And I think it might be double distilled as well, but I could be wrong about that. So as somebody who kind of leans into the complicated side of wargaming, right? Whether those are games that have emergent complexity, like Empire of the Sun, for example. The rules for Empire of the Sun are not really that complicated. To me, right? I mean, other people will tell you something different, and that doesn't mean, I don't mean to say that they are wrong. Hethwill, thanks for stopping by. But as somebody that kind of leans into the more complicated side of wargames, I have a different perspective on it than somebody who plays Combat Commander, right? That's their, that's 80% of the war games that they do, and maybe once or twice. I mean, and I know people like this, that once or twice a year they might play something like a Here I Stand or an Angola or something like that, and they'll play a fair amount of Commands and Colors or Twilight Struggle or something like that. I mean, they're going to have a very different idea of complexity than I do, or that some of the people watching probably do. And what that means is that me and the Combat Commander guy, neither of us are wrong. We're just speaking from our own experience and what types of games we find really heavily challenging to learn, right? It's always a lot easier when you have people, even if you don't have like a mentor, if you have someone else to help you stumble through it at your side, that by itself is helpful. We had this is actually a great example. Wife and I tried to play the Lord of the Rings customizable card game the other day. This is the one from Fantasy Flight, and it is a really opaquely written rulebook, I think. I think it can't be that complicated, right? And yet I found the rulebook very opaque, and not in a chatty, engaging to read type of way. It's got a very dry and mechanistic explanation of its rules, and so part of it is that it's a rule book written in a style I'm not used to, right? I've seen the same thing in Wargames. I had similar issues with the rule book for the Axis Empires games, just because it is structured in an unconventional way. The same thing with Balance of Powers. That rule book is structured in a very unconventional way, and I think that that makes it a challenge if you're used to seeing rules written a specific way. The thing with Empire of the Sun, I'll get back to emergent complexity. When you look at a game like the Goss system, right? So you have, I think the current Goss rulebook is roughly 80 pages or something like that. That's a large rulebook by any reasonable standard. And it's not lavishly, it's got illustrations and it's nice, but it doesn't have a ton of illustrations or big print or anything like that. It's 80 rock solid pages of rules. That is a game whose complexity is right up in your face, right? It is showing you, just from trying to read that rule book, it says, I am a super complicated game. And it is. On the other hand, you have something like Empire of the Sun or OCS. Neither of which I consider particularly complicated rules-wise, but there is a great deal of emergent complexity that emerges through play, through the interactions of those rules systems, that you might know all the rules systems, and yet if you don't understand the synthesis of all those different mechanics, or at least all the key parts of those mechanics, you are going to faceplant when you go to try to play that game against an actual opponent. And that's the thing that with those games makes them harder to learn strictly by yourself, because you are going to play both sides with your level of knowledge. And if you don't see the synthesis, then you're not going to see the synthesis. Let's take a look at the chat. Yeah, unfortunately, the game is less cool than the line from the book. So there's that. Matt Chestnut says motivation to play the game affects how complicated the rules appear. That's absolutely true, and I'm gonna get to some learning strategies here too, sooner or later. But we got a lot of time yet. The chess rulebook, John Longshore says, the chess rulebook could be hard if you're sitting there wondering why knights move in an L, which brings us back to whiskey. The knight is drunk. That is very plausible. Howard Montgomery asks, what games were complex when you first entered Wargame compared to today? Well, that kind of circles back to something like Third Reich, right? Which I think, back then it might well have earned its 10 out of 10 complexity, but now I think it probably would be a 7, right? Let's look at what is probably the most complicated thing that GMT does. And the other thing is that every publisher's got their own complexity scale too, right? So let's look at Next War Korea. I feel like the advanced game Next War Korea is pretty much, yeah, see, that's 8 out of 9. Why do they use 1 to 9? I don't know. That must have made sense to somebody at the time. So standard, according to GMT, and I told you all how GMT figures this out. They ask the designer how complicated they think it is, and that's what they go with. The standard game is 6 out of, is that 6? That's 5 out of 9. And the advanced game is 8 out of 9. Now, I don't think the basic game there is 5 out of 9. I think it's more like a 4 or a 3. Moscow. Okay, so if we start talking about Labatt, then we're going to get into a labyrinth of editions, and I don't know the difference between the various editions. I have had in my possession for a relatively brief period of time the original Labatai Lamasklava from GDW, and that's and honestly, I didn't really look at it. I glanced at it, and that's it. So, and I've been reluctant, let's say, to get into Labatt, in part because of complexity, and in part because, as was mentioned, I don't have the desire to learn a super complicated game on that subject at that scale. I just don't. All right. I'm happy with my brigade scale Napoleonics with the Kevin Zucker stuff. Very happy with that. Now, I mean, you want to give a customer, right? As if you're a publisher, you probably want to give a customer some idea of what they're in for, right? Nowadays, there's other ways to do that, right? You can put your rulebook online so people can look at it in advance and say, whoa, this is too much for me. That's completely fine. Back in the day, you were going to pick that game. I mean, unless you already knew somebody that was playing it, you were going to pick that game out of a catalog or buy it in a shrink wrap in a store and get it home and get that copy of Third Reich home and then decide, having spent the money, that, whoa, this is too much for me. So the publisher really does kind of want to give the prospective customer an idea of how complicated it is. But maybe because so many publishers, the majority of wargame publishers at this point, put some of their rules at least online, maybe we've passed the point where we need to do that. This also brings up a separate metric for tracking complexity, which is Board Game Geek's weight ratings. So let me catch up to the chat, and then I'm going to talk about that. Jeffrey, thanks for stopping by. Regs are quite a bit more complicated. Yeah, that's my understanding. Those are the gold standard of complexity. So complexity is correlated to record keeping? No, I don't think so. I think bookkeeping is a completely separate thing, which you may or may not like. I tend to like it, actually. But most people, I'm probably in the minority there, but that's fine. I'm used to it. But no, I don't think bookkeeping correlates to complexity at all, necessarily. You can have simple games that have bookkeeping and complicated games that have no bookkeeping. There is very little bookkeeping in ASL, for example. There's a couple things, but not much, unless you're playing like an elaborate campaign or something like that. Heldermeyer says he thinks a lot of wargaming's barrier to entry is how rulebooks are written. For example, his copy of TI4 comes with a learn to play guide and a rules reference guide. So I'll tell you, having played every other edition of Twilight Imperium, that I have not played nor looked particularly closely at Twilight Imperium 4. I understand it's a good revision. There are wargames that have, a staged learning process built into them. The classic example is the original Squad Leader, which used programmed instruction to gradually walk you through scenarios. The trouble with that is that they didn't then include a bunch of full game, well-rounded scenarios at the end for you to play, and you had to wait for the expansions to do that. But that's a problem specific to the original Squad Leader. You're never going to play, once you know how to play, you're never going to play that first scenario again, right? Because it's a learning scenario. And that's a problem with learning scenarios. In general, one of the things that a publisher or designer or developer can do to ease the difficulty of learning that game is to include an extensive example of play. That is, I think it's increasingly common to see that. GMT almost always does it, for example. Not always, but almost always. Other publishers, not so much, but I regard that as virtually mandatory nowadays. You can also put in learning scenarios that you can stage your way up in. Again, GMT is a good example for this. From MMP, the starter kits are them. That's what they are, basically. It's kind of a revision. It's a reversion to the staged programmed instruction, except you, instead of getting one starter scenario, you get a whole box of starter scenarios that happen to actually be replayable, which is nice. Not because they're super simplified rules, they're somewhat simplified, but because most of the simplification just comes with not including the complicated situational rules that make the full game much more complicated. I assume that you mean by CC, I assume you mean Combat Commander, and I will agree it is an excellent rulebook. Absolutely agree with that. And I say that as somebody that doesn't particularly like the game. It's an excellent, a very well constructed rulebook. All right, let's go back and take a look here. John Longshore says board game designers are clueless when it comes to Napoleonics. Just read a set of miniatures rules. I think a lot of people agree with that. I think a lot of people think that sort of where it's at is with Napoleonics is miniatures. I don't do miniatures, so I don't necessarily agree. I will certainly agree, however, particularly if you're looking at SPI, that's a lot of times their cookie-cutter approach didn't fit Napoleonics or, in fact, Gunpowder Era stuff particularly well. That's probably a somewhat controversial statement, but I think I can probably defend it if it came to that. Wargaming manuals sometimes seemed purposely obtuse. Well, that's definitely true. You can check out the World at War, the GMT World at War rulebook, for example. It is intentionally designed to be impossible to learn the game from. It is probably pretty good for reference, but it's to learn the game, forget it. Just looking. Greg Grant, thanks for stopping by. He says he does think it's correlated to the game designers or developers' ability to write a clear and comprehensive rulebook. Compare OCS rulebooks to something like Under Iron Sky. So that reminds me of a number of things. And I wish I remembered this gentleman's name. He may have passed. One of the guys behind Legend of the Five Rings, one of the publishers, for the publishers, told me one time, at an Origins party or something like that, if you're the designer, don't write the rulebook. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because you as the designer have sort of a unique, omniscient, but possibly blind due to your own omniscient perspective on your rules, and what you think are self-evident things about those rules may not be self-evident to somebody that's reading them. So maybe it's not a bad idea. And, this is the kind of thing that a developer used to do back when there was serious development in the hobby. And we take that role a lot less seriously now than we used to, I think. Maybe it makes sense to give your rulebook writing to somebody who's not in the project, who can write it learn the game and then write it from the ground up, using your outline, your original rules as an outline. Maybe that makes sense. Now, I will say that the OCS rulebook specifically, it is not flawless. However, it is probably the most highly polished, complex wargame rulebook I personally have seen. And I really think that's just due to iteration over the course of the 20 or 30 or whatever it is years that OCS has been around, where they've iterated it and worked in some of the questions and uncertainties and all that stuff, and just built that in to the point where it's really very clear how all those mechanics work from reading that rulebook. I won't say we never find ambiguities. We do, but because we play a lot of OCS, it's part of the reason. But that is a really, really, really good rulebook. And it is better than... I don't want to compare it to the SCS rulebook because that's 7 pages long, so that's not a fair comparison. The SCS rulebook is also very, very clear and well written. But compared to the Line of Battle rulebook or the BCS rulebook, there are many more ambiguities in there. And really, I think it's just because they haven't been iterated upon for as many years. I think that's all there is to it. All right, so Matt Chestnut says, Empire of the Sun isn't more difficult because of the rulebook, it's more difficult because the decisions aren't as obvious for non-wargamers, or even wargamers that aren't necessarily experienced with Empire of the Sun. How do you describe gaming complexity? What elements, multiple mechanics, non-linear mechanics, multiple exceptions, extensive rules, etc.? So, that's the trick, right? And different people are going to react differently to those things, right? Some people are really, really happy with an old, step through the sequence of play style of rulebook. Some people are much happier with an Axis Empires style procedural rulebook that doesn't explain anything until it comes time to execute that particular procedure. We had people to play it with, so we got through it, but it was the Axis Empires rulebook was a tough rulebook for me. Brant likes the tank on tank rulebook. I prefer the Tiddlywinks rulebook. That's just as good. Hathwell says Fighting Wings is complex due to the math record keeping. Now, if you have tons of more or less complicated math in there, that can increase the complexity. But the bookkeeping itself, just the paperwork, doesn't necessarily. Jeff M says the Second World War, 174 pages of 12-point font single-space rules, no illustrations or examples. Yes, very difficult and challenging rules. However, I think the rules themselves are not that complicated, generally speaking. Now, I'm still in the early stages of my exploration of that system, frankly. So I may come back to you in a month with a completely different opinion. But I feel like it's a huge rule book and there's a lot going on there, but I don't think any of the individual bits are particularly mind-blasting. Hethwell says he dislikes rulebook that split rules into basic, advanced, and optional. I think that's seldom warranted, but I think there are cases in which it's warranted. The Next War is one of those. If you play, there's a big step between the basic rules, and specifically the basic air system, and the advanced rules, specifically the advanced air system, which is almost complicated enough to be its own game on itself. I think it's warranted there. That can be a barrier to learning that game, because you want to step into the whole game, right? You don't want to dick around with the basic rules and then play that for several games and then play the advanced rules. People don't like that. People got stuck on the U.S. Civil War because they wanted to play with the advanced naval rules right away, and they bounced off of them, and that's because it was another thing for them to bounce off of on top of all the rest of the rules. So I agree that sometimes that's used and it's not necessary, but I think sometimes it's a good idea. John Longshore says his dog will poop on Park Place if you play Monopoly with him. I'm a little surprised that we don't see more programmed instruction, to be honest. I think it's got I mean, there's plenty of games that use it, but there's a lot more complicated games that don't. And it's easy to say this game is complicated or this game is not complicated without being particularly specific, right? It's easy to hand wave at the complexity because we all know what it is, right? We all have an idea of what to us is complicated and what isn't. But it's a lot harder to quantify that in an objective way, right? In part because everybody's different, right? Now, Hethel mentions an Gettysburg optional rule. Jeb Stewart is on the field on day one. So that's a funny thing. So sometimes optional rules are totally unplay-tested and will blow your game up. One example I can name from the last 12 months is the GTS Market Garden game that was played at Winterfest in early 2020, in February of 2020. We had two games, right? I was in the one that didn't break. The other game decided they were going to use the free Allied drop zone, so the Allies could drop wherever they wanted. So of course, the Allied, British First Airborne is going to drop right either inside or just outside. It's got to be outside actually of Arnhem, and they had the whole division in the city. So that screwed their game up very badly. Our game did not do that. We used the historical drop zones. So, I mean, you got to be careful with that. Sometimes these options are completely game-busting and may or may not have been play-tested. Mark Matthews says Fields of Fire is the only rulebook that he gave up on. I think a lot of people have bounced very hard off those rules. I just got it not too long ago. Well, it's about probably 9 months ago now, although the unboxing video just came out like a few weeks ago. Look, there's a lot going on there, so I have an idea of why people bounced off that rule book. Husa says he likes how coin games have a tutorial that you can take step by step to understand the game. It really helps to learn the systems. So here's another thing, and I don't know that this is in any of the coin games, but it's something that Volko has mentioned online. When asked about strategies for learning coin games, is play about 10 turns and don't let the players play the card events. Force them to use the action menus, because that's where the guts of the game really is, right? Are those action menus. So, and that's probably a really good idea. Now, I've always taken the position, Craig Campbell says, good player aids help immensely with complexity, which I completely agree with. Good player aids are not that difficult to do for most game systems, so most publishers don't really screw the player aids up very badly. But some publishers and or developers really go the extra mile on player aids, and some don't. So one example of games that does is the Vance von Borries East Front series. Whatever else you might think about those games, they have a fantastic array of player aids and displays and setup charts and all that stuff, scenario maps in those games. They are really good values for those, assuming you like the system. And I got my issues with that system, and I might revisit that topic at a later time. Yes, Helder Mayor, I agree completely about Empire of the Sun. I think it's not that complicated. We talked about this last week, I think. It is a uniquely Hermanesque design in that respect. It's got an enormous enormous and fascinating decision space without really being all that complicated. Stigler, I think they dropped closer than... I mean, there is some flatter terrain than where they dropped historically. Closer to Arnhem, which is, it's even in the movie. There's reasons why they didn't drop there, right? So they were able to get, like I said, the whole division into Arnhem before the Germans could react, and it completely screwed their... Among other things that they did to screw that game up. You do not want to drop in that game system into hexes that are not open terrain. Brent says for the coin games, you can also give the players the bot cards and have them just use the bot flowcharts for the decision-making tours. Yeah, I've thought of that, but then that's kind of taking the decision-making out of the players' hands, too. It's probably not a terrible idea. Maybe you play 4 turns with the bots, just guiding the decisions, and then you switch to being able to use the items off the menus instead. The coin bots don't always make the best available moves. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's why most people find the bots relatively challenging, I think. I've always... The coin bots are pretty easy to use, I think, as bots go. The Empire of the Sun bot is... No, I wouldn't play with it. Or the Churchill bots, actually. I don't like the bots for Churchill either. They're very, very mathy. Or just add points up all the cards and then just take the highest value. Speaking of that, Helder Mayor says, Pericles is an amazingly complex game. However, with the scenario introduction approach the manual takes, it's quite easy to get people into the game. So I didn't. I found Pericles, which I still have. I haven't quite given up on it yet. I found Pericles relatively challenging to learn, to be completely honest. Maybe I'll give it another whirl at some point. But I've also got Peloponnesian War, which is, dedicated Solitaire. You could play it with 2 people. I don't see why not. The current edition from GMT has explicit rules for that. I'm going to say that, let's assume that the game doesn't provide a straightforward learning path for you. It doesn't have learning scenarios or program instruction or whatever, right? So you're looking through the rules, and you don't really see how to get started. My advice is going to be just get started. Just punch a few pieces if you need to. Put them on the map. Don't follow a scenario, and follow the sequence of play, step by step, and just push counters around and until you get it down. And I've always found that that's a pretty good way to learn. That's how I learned coin, for example. Back in the day when the coin playbooks were probably a little bit less sophisticated than they are now. I will tell you, there's people that love Pericles, but I found it opaque. It's very untraditional. I forget whether Herman has described it as a wargame or not, but it's definitely not a conventional wargame. That's for sure. The Great Leader series. Are you talking about the DVG Leader series? So, you see, I've never played any of those. I've played, like, Field Commander Napoleon, which is fantastic, by the way. But I've never played Hornet Leader or any of those. I don't know that what I would call... Let's take a better example. Let's take... I don't know if it's a better example, but it's a clearer example that I have a little more experience with. Is the Enemy Coast Ahead games from GMT, which are really cool looking. Haven't played a campaign of any of them yet. Is what the game is... Oh, actually, better example. B-17 Queen of the Skies, right? I think we've probably all played a game like B-17 Queen of the Skies, whether that's the Hunters or Night Fighter Race or whatever it is. Is what that game is doing mechanically really a bot, right? I'm not sure that it is. I feel like if it's a bot, then it has to be trying at least to emulate a human player. And I don't think that's what those narrative-focused games are really doing. I think what they're doing is running the opposition, but they're not... You're playing versus the game system, but they're not really trying to emulate a human player's actions, right? The game is asymmetric in that respect, where here is the decision space that the player has. In B-17, that's a bit narrow decision space. And then here is this algorithm that the game is providing that will challenge you, but it's not trying to simulate somebody making decisions. Now, there's certainly, solitaire games that I think it is exactly like that. I mean, Peloponnesian War is one. I would absolutely describe that as a system, whether you call it a bot or not, that is trying to emulate human play. So Stigler says, just find a human opponent. So there are people that find that challenging. We can segue on to this now, since I might be complexityed out at this point. There are people that find that challenging, and I think there's social reasons for that. I think not necessarily personal or psychological reasons, right? There are people who are just natural introverts and don't want to approach people about playing and stuff like that, and there's those folks. There's other folks that just don't know that there are communities out there that exist to support this kind of hobby. It's a lot harder position to find yourself in now that we have the internet than it used to be. But it used to be very easy to say, I don't know anybody that plays D&D or Third Reich or whatever. I mean, and now we can just go online and find those people. Furthermore, now we have digital options for playing such games like Vassal, or if you must, Tabletop Simulator or whatever. So I can find somebody to play Atlantic Wall with next week, probably, if I really wanted to. And there are various avenues for doing that. There's a Discord server that is dedicated to Vassal matchmaking. There's a monthly thread on BGG, which is probably what more people have seen. That's dedicated to matchmaking, so there's that going on. There are avenues to do this. I mean, you can even lurk around on the Vassal servers, although I think that's a little creepy to just butt into people's games and say, hey guys, can I play? That'd be weird. Peter says, how about games that are technical simulations, including tons of info on the machinery versus rules complexity? Looks like Air Force is a game like that, actually. I might even describe Starfleet Battles as a game like that. That doesn't necessarily make it complicated, but it can. I mean, if you are going... I suspect that, as from a designer standpoint, if you're going to include this massive data repository, then you might as well include heavily simulative rules that will use all the data points in your elaborate data repository. And that makes the game complicated rather than the data itself making the game complicated. Because if you have more data, then you have more to simulate, right? Mark Matthews says, finding a person to play against is very hard if you don't live in the U.S. The time difference isn't easy. But that's probably true. I mean, international people with radically different time zones. I mean, me and somebody that lives in California can probably figure something out. Me and somebody that lives in Australia, that's a little harder, right? But a lot of people outside the U.S., that's their option, right? Is to find people through Vassal. Hey, I'm in, Tonga. I don't know anybody here. Let's, get on the internet and play. That's if that's your option, that's your option. And as Stigler mentions, at least with Vassal, you could play through email. You can't do that with, at least not in a straightforward way, through Tabletop Simulator. Mark Matthews, he's talking about the Armchair Dragoons forums. If you Google Armchair Dragoons, they'll come up. So that's another thing that maybe not all, because we Americans are bad at this, maybe some folks don't recognize, is that in Europe, very often when somebody says war games, what they mean or what you think of are miniatures rather than a board war game with hexes and counters and stuff like that. It's just a different perspective. I mean, Vassal even makes it easier to solitaire stuff, to be honest. Just, the old-fashioned solo where you just play both sides. Because you don't have to set it up. You don't have to leave it set up. You just close it when you're... Save and close it when you're done. I mean, you can often bully your friends into playing. That's possible. I mean, I got mostly work people playing Traveler, so and then the plague hit and that evaporated. But I mean, I got people to agree with it for. I think 2 of those people came from local either RPG or wargame communities, and the other 5 came from work or people that I worked in the same building as. So, shame that didn't pan out, but you know, what is what it is. UK's got a thriving miniatures scene. To what extent it is Games Workshop these days, I couldn't tell you. I don't go to any miniatures-focused events. I mean, there's a fair amount of miniatures happening at Origins. Honestly, at this point, there's just as much historical miniatures happening at Origins as, based on 2 years ago, as there is like fantasy, Warhammer Fantasy and 40K and Iron, whatever that thing is, with the steampunk mechs. There's just as much historical stuff happening at Origins as that stuff. If you kind of expand the definition of miniatures to include board games that happen to have miniatures, like Memoir 44, then the same thing definitely applies, but I don't normally count those as miniatures games. My understanding is that GMT, you can get their stuff through Second Chance Games at, I don't know that it's not more expensive. I would imagine that it is, but I believe that is, at least in theory, supposed to defray that cost. Are there any UK-based Hex Encounter wargame publishers? I open the floor to anybody. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Doesn't mean there aren't any. I know there's at least 2 in France. There's at least 2 or 3. There's at least 2 or 3 in Italy. Germany, I think there's 1. Poland, I believe there's at least 2 that I could think of, but can't pronounce. There's at least 1 in Spain. Now, I mean, a lot of these folks, like the 3 Dados guys, which I think are Spanish, does this? I've played one of their games, actually, Democracy. I think it's called Democracy Under Siege, and it was pretty good. But does it really tickle a wargame thing? I'm not sure that it does. So on the other hand, they're one of those Polish companies, and Hexasim, they do tons of like pretty. Beautiful, but relatively conventional Hex Encounter stuff. You're probably the most awesomely named publisher of wargames anywhere is Europa Simulazione in Italy, and they, I think, do some Hex Encounter stuff as well. Thin Red Line Games, of course, is an Italian publisher, and boy, they're hardcore on the Hex Encounter thing. I guess I'll talk about the... I'm reluctant, speaking of the prospective sale of additional stuff, I'm reluctant to ship anything out still due to lingering COVID potential symptoms. So we're gonna sit tight on that for another week or so. We'll see. Like I mentioned last week, I even made the video and then I didn't get it posted because something changed. The copy of Last Chance for Victory I had was missing the markers, so I had to text my buddy in Colorado and say, hey, do you have the markers for this? Because I can sell it as a complete copy if you have the markers, and I have to sell it as an incomplete copy if you don't. So he sent me the markers, so I have those now. They spent only an extra couple of days in transit, unlike a lot of the other stuff that's floating around. Trafalgar, yep, that's true. I'd forgotten about them, but they're another one, and I think they're doing pretty traditional Hex Encounter stuff too. There's at least, Craig Campbell says I should host a game convention. A, we can't do that right now. B, that's not necessarily totally impossible, actually. A little bit of thought has in fact gone into that. Now, of course, where would such a thing happen? In all likelihood, Central Ohio, which is not an area of the country that is starved for gaming conventions or even wargame specific events. I mean, we've only got a couple of wargame specific things here in Central Ohio, but we have at least 2 other things elsewhere in Ohio that are wargame central. So don't be shocked if that eventually happens, but it ain't happening this year, I can tell you that. So a counter-clipping convention. I can get the counter-clipping Zoom meeting going, and we might actually do that at some point. Get multiple people in the chats to weigh in on these interesting questions that otherwise it's just me yammering on about. So, boy, this is tasty stuff. And no, I do not need to put water in it at all. To see who can clip counters the fastest. I mean, I don't try to move fast. I have 2 counter sheets. A little less than 2 counter sheets. And I'm done in an hour. Now, they're 5/8" counters, so they're fewer counters, too. So, it's probably about a total of about 1.5 counter sheets of 5/8" counters that I just clipped in less than an hour. So, my whiff's already clipped, so I don't know if you guys have seen the World in Flames Super Deluxe, but I don't have the Super Deluxe, but I have the Deluxe, which I bought in pieces, not as one unit. And it's all clipped and sorted. I have done a video on that. I've done, in fact, 2 videos on how that's organized. Matt Chestnut said he likes to mix his scotch with RC Cola. It is a free country, and if you enjoy it that way, then by all means, keep doing that. I would only do that with truly atrocious scotch. Jeff M. says, given the choice between turpentine and scotch, he would be hard-pressed to choose. Scotch is definitely an acquired taste. Let's say that when I was about 18, maybe 19, I had a super bad experience with scotch and didn't touch it again for a long time. And then somebody gave me a glass of what I think was Macallan 15 or something like that. And I'm like, oh, this is actually good. How about that? And I think I had already started doing bourbon by then. And then when we started getting into the Society for Creative Anachronism, which I'm not currently involved in, but nothing says I won't be again at some point, we started doing camping events with people that would bring scotch, right? And there's a particular individual who would bring tons and tons of scotch and allow you to taste different kinds of scotches. And you got to see that there's a wide array of different flavor experiences available in scotch, and you could probably find one that you like. A lot of people think, oh, scotch all has that smoky Band-Aid taste. It's like, well, no, it all doesn't, actually. If you don't like that specifically, you can try something like Glenkinchie, which is a lowland scotch that has it's very light. It has no peatiness whatsoever. Even some of the mainstream ones, I don't think that something like Macallan, for example, has a detectable peat, but I'm drinking Lafroig, so don't take my word for it. And I can't taste anything right now. This tastes great, but it's because all I'm getting is the peat, to be honest. If all you want is peat and nothing but peat, there is a single malt scotch called McClellan's Isla, and it is... Why do you think I have a poofy shirt that just happens to be sitting around somewhere in a tote? But McClellan's Isla is, as far as anybody knows, there's no real McClellan's distillery, and it's not spelled like George McClellan, by the way. It's spelled with a D at the end, and it is fucking terrible. It is nasty, but it's super peaty. And if you just like peat, it's like $20 a bottle. It's really cheap. As far as anybody can tell, it's super young Bowmore. Every Bowmore that I have had, and I've only had that and like the regular main expression of Bowmore, has had this sort of Bowmore wang that I don't like, and that doesn't water down, particularly if you add water to it. I don't like it, and that's why I don't like the McClellan's Isla. But it's got basically peat and just this off Bowmore flavor. I don't do that. But if you just want peat, then Good for you. Glenmorangie 14. I like Glenmorangie quite a bit. It's really good. It's really kind of a Scotch drinker Scotch, right? It's not an intro Scotch. It's not an incredibly friendly single malt, except for the price, which is very friendly. And I'm talking about the Glenmorangie 10, I guess. The 14 I don't think I've had, but I've had a couple of, like the Quintrubon, which I've had, which is very good. The Nectar d'Or is very good. There's one more of those special cask finishes that I've also tried. So, Missing Seattle says 10-year-old Lafroig is turpentine. I love the 10-year-old Lafroig. But I like heavy peat. So if you don't, then you are probably going to have a negative experience with the 10-year-old Lafroig, which is like the punchiest of like the main, I don't know about, I've had Peat Monster actually. I think 10-year-old Lafroig tastes peatier than Peat Monster, to be honest. It's super punchy. So the Missing Seattle, are you in Scotland? Because that's not how it works. The farther west you go in Scotland, the more peaty things go, very vaguely, because the home of peat is in the Isles to the west of Scotland. Durf85, welcome. He says that peaty whiskey is similar to overhopped IPA. Don't know how to distinguish yourself, add more peat. That's true. However, many of the older expressions have been around for decades, right? Long before there was a whiskey boom. So, I mean, to some extent, I think that's true, and you can see it in some of the no age statement stuff that you see right now. Is just add more peat. But a lot of people don't like peat. They find it intimidating or off-putting, and I can't argue with that. I just don't agree, but, it's just me. Who's this? Is getting back to the complexity topic. Wargame complexity. Is it targeted to someone who has never played wargames or to people already into the hobby? That's an interesting question to ask about any particular wargame, and I wonder if maybe it isn't at least as valuable as some numerical rating that maybe doesn't tell you very much about what the rating means. And we never talked about BGG's weight rating, by the way, other than to bring it up. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Somebody says, Helder Mayora says, I have good taste in Scotch. What do I think of Kalila? Kalila is my favorite Scotch, in fact. I love Kalila. It is from the Isle of Islay. It is not Islay or Islay, it's Islay. And there's a great whiskey channel on YouTube called Ralphie, Ralfy, Ralphie.com. If you look him up, he's the guy to watch for Scotch factoids. Be prepared to be inundated with information. Ardbeg is quite peaty. It's, I think, got the highest, the base expression of Ardbeg, if you can even get it now, has, I think, the highest phenols number. But for my money, I think Lafroig tastes peatier. Scapa I've never actually had. I would like to try it, but it's like $80 or $90 a bottle here, and I think that's expensive for an unknown quantity. A lot of the other islands have fairly peaty stuff. So Talisker, for example, is from the Isle of Skye, and it is also quite peaty and very, very good, I might add. Brand says he got a tour of the Ardwulf distillery when they were in Scotland about 15 years ago. Yep. Pete, thanks for stopping by. This is Johnny Walker Double Black, by the way. So it's not super high-end stuff, but it's very good and very drinkable. And I have COVID, so I can't taste anything. It tastes great. Scotch Test Dummies. Yes, I was subscribed to him for a while, but I found the blather a little too much. So I think, still subscribed, but I don't actually watch the videos very often. I watch Ralphie's videos, and there is another channel I just started watching called Bourbon Junkies. That's pretty good. So, John Longshore, I am cigar-free as of, well, it's been a while since I've had a cigar. I am nicotine-free, probably about 6 months now. Tobacco-free, I'm about 14 months. No actual tobacco has passed my lips in about 14 months. I am still vaping, for those curious. Still got this thing. I'm trying to do it less, which is, a hit-and-miss thing, but it's been 0% nicotine for some time now. Peat is, in fact, a type of dirt, just so we're clear on that. I mean, that might not be scientifically true, but it's kind of true, right? And it is exactly the kind... It's not the same stuff, but I mean, if you go to the yard store and get peat moss, that is the stuff. That's what you're getting. So... Scotch complexity ratings. I mean, you could easily get there is Scotch ratings if you want to go with that. I guess Ralphie does ratings, but I mean it's like a good movie reviewer, right? If you that reviewer and their taste, and maybe that number means something to you, but just looking at it in isolation, it doesn't mean anything. So. Beet flavored whiskey. There probably is such a thing. Somebody that I was camping with at one point made a carrot wine, which they said was really good. Actually, I didn't get to try it. I would have tried it, but boy, it sounds bizarre to me to have wine made from carrots. If you think about it, it does make sense. Carrots are very high in sugar. You could do that with beets if you wanted to. Now, beets to my palate, in fact taste like dirt. So, not something I enjoy. As well says CRTs give him cramps. I mean, the CRT as a mechanism has a long pedigree, right? But it's not particularly complicated. Generally, it's odds-based. It doesn't have to be, right? There are other like factor-based where you just add the factors up. Say I have 15 factors attacking, right? And find your CRT on this. Find your whatever you're trying to roll on the table. That's something you can do. That's something that probably makes sense for certain topics or based on the combat system. But your like traditional odds-based CRT, I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. The thing about tables is a lot of people find tables super intimidating, and they find tables complex. But table is a way to distill a bunch of information into a compact format that you can then just quickly reference. And they well-designed tables anyway remove complexity, remove rules overhead, while adding potentially simulation value. Or verisimilitude. I mean, it doesn't have to be simulation value. While decreasing rules overhead, right? And I mean, really, that's what we're talking about when we talk about complexity. I think most of the time, there's some abstract component there that might not equate to actual rules overhead that you, the player, have to deal with. But mostly, that's not the case. Peet's Coffee is a brand of coffee. It is out on the West Coast. I believe it has been bought by Starbucks, I think. It is very good coffee. I will commend them for having good coffee. It's a lot better than Seattle's Best Coffee, let me put it that way, which is not really that good. The Piat. Bring out the Piat! So, I mean, there are many other potential combat resolution methods that you can use besides a CRT. You can use the bucket o' dice system that is used by many war games, including a whole bunch of stuff that Avalanche Press does. The Columbia Games block, at least the World War II block games, use a buckets of dice system. I mean, it can work. Well, actually, like the Napoleonic Wars and Here I Stand and Virgin Queen and presumably the new, whatever that thing's called, Tanto Monte or whatever it is, those will presumably have, I mean, those use the buckets of dice method too. So I would, John Longshore, I would call that Ypres. I don't know that, I know that the British called it wipers, and it makes sense from a British point of view, but I'm not British, so I'll call it Ypres, which is probably not the correct French pronunciation either, but that's as close as I'm going to get. So Brand is talking about the Lock and Load World at War series, not the GMT A World at War giant monster game. Which is not a buckets of dice system. It's a here's a different table for every single thing in the game, and a giant book of those tables to play with. Yeah, so I mean, there's Brant's mentioning World at War, Lock and Load Tactical, the Bayonet games, which is his game, Warfighter series, Buckets of Dice. I don't mind that necessarily. I mean, it depends, right? But for tactical, depends. I mean, maybe it makes sense. I'm not going to say that Buckets of Dice can't make sense. I mean, based on the exact subject matter and how it's handled. As a mechanic, it's generally not my preference, but there's nothing really wrong with it. I mean, I'm rolling 5 dice at a time for any given combat, rolling OCS as well. So, So your Stigler, since you mentioned that, one example of a factor-based CRT, which does not have, you're just counting the number of firepower factors that are firing into a specific target, is Great Battles of the American Civil War. You're just counting the factors, and there can be column shifts, as I recall. There can, based on range, and then you're capped on the number of factors that can actually be projected out of a given hex, and that is more or less the way Line of Battle works as well. And in fact, I think a lot of those types of sort of late age of gunpowder type of games are probably going to work that way. Who said there is an app for OCS? That's kind of like just an OCS assistant type of thing that'll roll a dice and I think look the rules up for you. I have never used it, but you know, maybe we're the outliers. Maybe we just don't need it. We've had people that have used the die rolling apps in the past around here. I don't like to. I like to roll physical dice. I have enough problems. I mean, I'm aware, having some programming experience, that computer random number generators aren't really random number generators. I'd rather get dice, and I guess, you know, when you come right down to it, maybe physical dice aren't either, but they feel more like it. So I'm satisfied with that. I should have brought down my other, the rest of the ESL counters. There's another sheet and a half, I believe, of half-inch counters. Hilariously, so I'm struggling to install the printer, and then I ended up re-imaging the computer. Didn't unplug the printer. It just works now. It just works. Everything works fine. I did nothing to get it to do that. It just works. So that's great, but it's weird. I accidentally printed to the printer and it just came out. I'm like, what the fuck? I fooled with this for 2 days. Stigler points out that GB ACW has more ways to affect the dice up and down rather than column to column. That's true. And there's a lot of nuance to that game system too. So if folks aren't familiar with the Great Battles of the American Civil War system, this creates a lot of confusion because, speaking of which, I got something else to mention. Because there's another game series called the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War series, and they sound related, and they're not. They're not related at all, other than both being games about the American Civil War. So the ConsimWorld has a new social platform coming. I don't know if it's been launched yet or not because I haven't checked it today. And I feel like, and I thought about pinging John and actually having him on to talk about this because I feel like there's been some unnecessary confusion about it. And I suspect that there's been some post on ConsimWorld itself that has been completely clear. But the people who don't go to ConsimWorld all the time and to the ConsimWorld forums seem to be confused about this, and more than one person has asked. So ConsimWorld for a couple years now has had this sort of social front end that's kind of a completely separate thing from the forums, which is the part of ConsimWorld that everybody knows, that in the news feed. And this new social platform is just going to replace the old social platform. It's not going to replace the forums. The forums will stay there. That would be an incalculable, as somebody who finds the ConsimWorld forums very tiresome to deal with for a variety of reasons, including technical reasons, because it is a troglodytic, ancient-ass piece of software. It would be an incalculable loss to the hobby to lose that information, and that would hugely, hugely, hugely suck. They're not gonna do that. We're only talking about the old social site, which I think nobody was really using anyway. So just to clarify that, I think I'm correct on that, and so don't fear that ConsimWorld is going away or dumping all their old data. That's not happening. John Longshore says he still has a rotary landline nailed to the kitchen wall. I am old enough to remember my family and my grandparents and all that having rotary phones, which I suspect would confuse children raised nowadays, actually. But so many things would, so. But then, we did the same thing. I installed, I didn't install it. I looked at I signed up on the website for TikTok. No idea. How do you use this? Do you just? People produce these like exquisitely edited videos for it. They're 10 seconds long or whatever. I'm like, I ain't doing that. How are you doing that on your phone? I'm not doing that. That's crazy. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I get to whine about the kids, and the kids get to whine about me. It's all good. Matt Chestnut points out the die roll in RAF tells you how far to shift down after cross-referencing the CF with the number of planes in the battle. I haven't played RAF. It's on my list of things I'd like to play. It does look like the definitive version of that is the new version from Decision. It's got a mounted map, and it's got the 3 different games in the box. Basically, you can play Solitaire as the British, Solitaire as the Germans, or 2 players. That's pretty nice. It's a pretty nice feature right there. There is a unboxing video of that if anybody wants to see it. This week's unboxing, and the trouble is that if they talk about upgrading it, people immediately blow up and start, oh, you can't change it, it's got to look exactly like this, or we can, oh my God. I don't understand that, but there it is. So, there's this week's unboxing video, by the way. We have Travel to Tuesday coming tomorrow. Brant, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for hanging around so long in particular. And if we don't talk before then, I will see you at the Hootenanny this weekend. This week's unboxing video is The Confederate Rebellion, which is a solitaire game about the American Civil War. Now, the interesting thing about this solitaire American Civil War game is you play as the Union. A lot of these games that are these solitaire American Civil War games, of which there are several, you play as the South. And I think that's the more natural configuration for such a game, because the South has their work cut out for them. Would have been very difficult for them to win. So that's attractive to make them the player agent in the game. This one, I wanted this one specifically because it's not like that. You're playing the Union. I really found that appealing. Let's see. Yeah, so reminder, we've mentioned this already. This weekend, there are 2 digital virtual gaming conventions, one of which is the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War event, which is sort of the digital winter offensive. So check out Multiman Publishing's website about that. Or if you're not doing Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, and you want to play something else, anything else, go check out the Armchair Dragoons virtual convention, which is also this weekend, starts on Friday. You can Google Armchair Dragoons to find out all the dirt on that. So, yes, the Confederate Rebellion is from White Dog. I think it's not a Ben Madison game, though, and I know a bunch of those solitaire designs from White Dog are Ben Madison games. I bought a pile of them about 6 months ago, so... So Heldermeyer says, how do you manage your time between playing games you love and want to deepen and games you want to try new? That's a challenge, I'll be honest. I am the kind of player that always wants to try new stuff. And I'm trying not to be. I'm trying to be somebody who is willing to try new stuff, but is more focused about what gets played. And to some extent, I've succeeded in that over the last couple of years with a local focus on OCS that's been very easy to to Pete. Is that happening this weekend as well? It's been challenging to get other things to the table sometimes. As we say, we want to play GTS. Well, there's one local guy that plays GTS. So we managed to do that, in addition to the huge GTS game that we did at Winterfest. But that is it's one of those things that we have to juggle. It is unquestionably a better strategy to stay focused on a small number of games, because you will be better at those games, because you're playing those games, you're playing those 3 games more rather than playing these 50 games, right? And diverting your attention between the rules and the strategies and all that other stuff between... See, Stigler, you should have asked that when Brant was still here. I suspect that there'll be no comment on that particular rumor. Some say that Angus Young will be there. All these kids don't know who Angus Young is, though. That's the thing. Okay, yeah. So there's a scheduling challenge for me. Is I would have wanted to go to the Great Campaigns event, and it's happening the same weekend as the Armchair Dragoons event, which I'm committed to. So I will probably stick my head in on Sunday morning at the developer roundtable, whatever that's called, for that. But I'm not going to actually play any games. I'm going to be tied up too much of the rest of the time to really do that. So that's just, my misfortune. I will yell at Brant for next year when they decide to do this on the same weekend as something else that's going on. But I think the announcements happened at about the same time, so... Tony, so I guess we'll talk about this. Tony's asking about different deals that you get at these sort of publisher-centric events. And I've never been to GMT's Weekend at the Warehouse or GMT East or any of that. So I don't know what GMT does. But I've been to the Compass one now, and I've been to the MMP one now. And the MMP stuff is available at a discount at the event. I don't know what the discount percentage is, but I can tell you it's not like half off. It's like probably 10-20% discount. Whereas at Compass's event, this is not a comparison between the two publishers. I'm not trying to do this, but you were asking. So Compass has a flat 50% off everything. Even stuff that just came out, as far as I know, at Compass was still 50% off. So I walked out of there with a whole bunch of stuff too. So the funny thing about Multiman is there had been a large number of wish list items from Multiman that I had wanted, and I was kind of picking away at this list. But a couple of them are hard to buy because they're big, expensive games, like War of the Suns and The Greatest Day. Those are big, expensive games. And I just bought it all last year at Winter Offensive. A lot of the stuff I bought at Compass was more of a spur of the moment type of thing. It's like, half off, might as well. So if we were having a Winter Offensive and I was going this year, like this weekend, other than whatever the new ASL product is that was supposed to be there, had it not been canceled, I don't think I'd buy anything. Because I bought it all last year. So I'm pretty much topped up on all the MMP series that I need. Even like the OCS stuff. I mean, I got all the stuff that I want, right? The only thing I'm really wish listing at this point from Multiman is None But Heroes, and I've got a line on that. I just gotta get the sale up to have the capital to do it. So John Longshore is asking if MMP is going to put the issues of the Skirmisher on Drive-Thru RPG. I don't have them here anymore, but I picked up both. Somebody was kind enough to send me both issues of the Skirmisher without the counters, so there's that. But I do have both the magazines now. It would be nice if they would put those up in PDF. I agree with that. I know there's been some talk of, since over the last few years, it's been hard to see that this year because we have had, for the last 12 months since we've had no conventions, but interest in Great Campaigns, the American Civil War, has been surging, noticeably. So I think there was talk about bringing back the Skirmisher or some kind of Great Campaigns feature magazine, which I would love to see happen. But I haven't heard anything like firm on that, so don't quote me. But I would be delighted to. I will be happy to patronize. Let me put it this way: any further Great Campaigns, the American Civil War product that Multi-Man Publishing would care to do, no problem. John Longshore says if there was an Amazon Avalanche press, a 99% off sale. I'd kind of like to try that great World War II, Second World War at Sea series. Not the alternate history stuff. That doesn't interest me at all. But some of that Second World War at Sea stuff actually might be interesting. That is a series that does have some fans. I have done my time with Panzer Grenadier and shan't be getting back into it. Let me put it that way. There was a point at which Avalanche was doing like stuff from different designers. Now they're really not. They're really just doing Panzer Grenadier and the War at Sea stuff. And I haven't had the War at Sea stuff ruined for me. Let me put it that way. Panzer Grenadier I felt was uninteresting and unfun. Again, I've mentioned this before. There are people that like it. Great. I'm happy for them. Oh, go at it. But it didn't work for me. And I have a whole video on that, so check that out. A little excited about the Traveler thing. I have no immediate campaign prospects or anything like that, but I've been working on a Traveler custom homebrew setting for a while, off and on, and it has recently gotten to the point where I can show parts of it off, and that's kind of what we're doing in the video tomorrow. So if anyone is into Traveler, it's about a half-an-hour video of me looking at Universal World profiles and figuring out what that means for those worlds and kind of explaining as I go. People want to do that, please comment on that video because I might do more of that stuff. Was wondering what the longest campaign game I've ever played. So if we're talking about... Okay, so I assume we're talking about war games and not RPGs. Longest RPG campaign I've ever participated in was about 3 years. And believe it or not, that was a campaign of Dangerous Journeys. On the other hand, maybe we count that that 5-year period where Ars Magica was our main game, and we ran multiple campaigns, some of which had actual endings and stuff. But we kept playing Ars Magica. Longest war game was about a year and a half. We played Second Front, Europa Second Front. We played it from the very beginning to the bitter, bitter end. And I was super, super, super tired of looking at it by the time we were done. I've actually started to cool off on my... I still think Europa is a deeply flawed system in this day and age. However, I've recently become more willing to entertain the idea of playing Europa again at some point. So we'll see if that happens. I definitely don't want to do Second Front again, because that was torture. But after a while... For a while it was cool, but you're just doing the same thing turn after turn after turn after turn. And it came down to pretty much the last turn. It was a German victory, just because the Allies had tried a couple of amphibious invasions of northern Italy that didn't work out. They got bottled up there. And it sucked a lot of Allied momentum away. Craig Campbell asks, what pre-orders am I awaiting currently? Okay, so I don't think it's available for pre-order yet, but Multi-Man is going to put a couple of things up for pre-order in the relatively near future, one of which is the new version of Hollow Legions. I will definitely get in on that. I am in on the existing pre-order for Rising Sun. Between those two, that means that I will have an up-to-date version of everything for ASL, all the national modules, except for Doomed Battalions, which there I would hope a new version of that's in the pipeline, because that's been a while. There's also Hood Strikes North and Stonewall Jackson's Way 2 from Multi-Man. I am in on both of those. I don't need Stonewall Jackson's Way 2, but again, it's sort of a new version with a new counter sheet, so we're gonna do that. From GMT, we have on pre-order, we have Pacific War, which I've talked about. I also have the let's see, from GMT, we have the new edition of the Great Battles of Julius Caesar, which I'm very much looking forward to. I managed to get a copy of that sometime in the last year, but it's really old. It's got super thin counters. Not really something I'm super thrilled with. So will be thrilled to get the new edition with the nice thick counters and all that jazz. It's a great series. I love the Great Battles of History series. What else from GMT do I have on order? The Musket and Pike Dual Pack is something that I have on order. I had pre-orders up for the new versions of the East Front series, and I dropped those pre-orders. I may redo those, but we'll see. Some things are going to have to materialize before I can push the button on that. From Compass, we have Gilbert Collins' War for America. We also have the Joe Balkowski Korean War, which is also on its way eventually. Actually, that's pretty soon, I believe. The Frank Chadwick Third World War series, that's on its way from Compass. There is one other, the Carry Battles Philippines Sea. I'm actually pretty excited to see that from Compass as well. From Legion Wargames has something in the pipeline that I was interested in, and I don't remember what it was. As did Revolution Games, I think. It's not DVG, it's Lock and Load Publishing has... eventually they're going to do a new version of Trial of Strength. I'm very interested to see that. That is a fantastic game. Their component quality will be off the charts. So I will totally be interested in that. Oh, and also, I have the new version of War and Peace, which was kickstarted in October, November. So that probably will end up in my hands around April, is my best guess. They actually just sent the survey out to get your shipping address. So I just filled it out last week anyway. So Tanto Manta, I don't know about that. I am lukewarm on it. I'm actually not pre-ordered on it, but that Red's Dust Rebellion Mars coin game, that actually looks quite neat. I might end up super duper interested in that. I am positive there's more stuff from GMT that I have on pre-order. Let's take a look at that. Space Empire's expansion, all good things. That's probably pretty short list for that to go. Into the Woods, which is the Great Battles of the American Civil War Shiloh game. This will be the first return of the series to Shiloh since SPI's 1978, I think, Bloody April. Very much looking forward to seeing that. I think that's it that I haven't already mentioned. Roads to Leningrad. I'll mention this since there's a decent number of people here, and I feel like this is not getting anywhere near the attention that it deserves. There's a P500 up right now for a new printing of GMT's Roads to Leningrad. It's a companion game to Roads to Moscow. It's got 2 battles in it. There's 2 battles, each of which has 2 scenarios. It's a 2-map game. It's one map double-sided, so you flip the map over to play the other game. And these are terrific little operational chit pull systems. It's a really cool system. If you want to see it played, I've mentioned before, Jeremy Antley has a playthrough series of Roads to Leningrad. I've played Roads to Moscow. Roads to Leningrad is just as good. I really want to see that, and it's been languishing on the P500 list for a long time now. If you don't have that game, I would highly recommend it. I absolutely think that you should be interested in that. If you're interested in a hex encounter, operational East Front type of thing, it's a Vance von Voorhees design, and it's got some of the same ideas as the East Front series, but it's not the same system. It's considerably lighter, but it's not super dumbed down or anything like that. It's got a lot of meat, a lot of nuance. It's, I think, just as good a series of games as the Simonich operational games are. And unfortunately, it's not getting a lot of attention. I think because Vance has been kind of backseating it for a long time. That's probably why, where Mark Simonich has been cranking out a game a year or so for a while. He's kind of keeping his reputation up to date, where Vance not so much. But yeah, absolutely, get in on the roads to Leningrad. All right, so catching up to the chat. Stigler says he played a Red Badge of Courage that took a year and a half. I believe that. Second Manassas, I believe that. It's a big battle. Okay, so Pete says the next 3 ASL modules will be Hollow Legions, Rising Sun, and Yanks. I've got Yanks. I don't need another one. Although, I hope that there won't be like more stuff in the new Yanks than there were in the last Yanks, because I don't want to buy another one, because I just bought it not that long ago. I bought the last printing of it. That was getting the. I mean, I had an old Yanks, so I had the pieces, but it was nice to get the new, nicer pieces. Yeah, so I mean, I really do, again, strongly recommend Roads to Leningrad. Vance had talked about a third game in the series, and I think, frankly, he doesn't feel like there's interest. So I would absolutely, again, recommend taking a look at that series. Again, you can see very well done play-by-play video on Jeremy's channel. If you search for Roads to Leningrad, it'll come up on YouTube. So definitely check that out. So... yeah, if Husa's in Puerto Rico, I mean, as somebody that used to ship stuff for a living, you wouldn't think that it would be as big of a hassle as it is to ship stuff to Puerto Rico, because it's part of the United States, and yet in so many ways it's treated like it's not, for a variety of things, not just shipping stuff, but it's weird, and I don't understand why there's as much trouble shipping to Puerto Rico as there is. It's ridiculous. And again, I have to, you have to follow the exact same NAFTA procedure to ship to Puerto Rico as you do to ship to Mexico. If I want to ship something to Detroit, I can just stick it in a box, take it to the post office, off it goes. Want to ship it to Puerto Rico, I got to follow all these NAFTA regulations. It's ridiculous. So, I think I did 1 or 2 international orders on the last sale. I shipped 1 thin decision box to somebody in Japan? Maybe. I know it cost more than the game costs, like twice as much as the game cost to ship it. So, I can tell you that. Yeah, you can just have the truck pull up to Pete's house and drop him off a pallet of starter kits and miscellaneous goodies. And then Pete can be your distribution point in Canada. That sounds like a completely workable solution. All right. More? Yeah, why not? A little bit more. Just a little bit. This was a Christmas gift, by the way. And I appreciate it. Oh, something else came in. I did a video on this, but I'm not going to publish it because it's crap. Not that. Griffin Mountain came in. This is the new print-on-demand version from Chaosium. I never owned the original, which is a classic. This has like the original plus some extra stuff that appeared in Worm's Footnotes and stuff like that. Really nice. If you're interested in any of the old RuneQuest 2 stuff, you can pretty much get it all print on demand now from Lulu, and the quality is good. You got to be careful with print on demand. I ordered this Mithras. This is another basic role-playing system. This is basically it's RuneQuest 6 with the RuneQuest stuff filed out of it because they lost the rights. And I got this, and it's like, oh, it's okay, yeah. And I opened it, cracked the spine upon first opening. It's shit. The soft cover's fine. The hard cover is a pile of poop. So, pretty much my role-playing interests at this point. I've got a couple things that aren't going anywhere for archival reasons. Our Traveler, various Chaosium things, and Harn, and that's it. but Harn kind of brings with it its own thing, right? So you have, what system do you use? Do you use Harn Master? I wouldn't necessarily. I might just use D&D because it's easier. It's easier to find people for D&D, and that's a factor. So we'll see. I have no immediate plans to do anything with that. So I think I'm going to give everybody a little heads up and say let's go for about another 10 minutes. So if folks have any final questions, ask away. I think we did have a fairly good discussion of wargame complexity. At some point, I'm inclined to say a lot of these topics that I'm picking are topics that would be really good to have multiple people talking about it on the stream. And maybe we'll do that, or maybe I'll just... But I want to have a topic, like, to direct the flow of conversation, too. And not just blather for 2 hours. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've had quite a good turnout for these, actually, is that there's a topic, and it's not just me talking, I think. I don't know. So... So I would love to see Blood Reef. I don't expect this to happen. I would the single ASL historical module that I don't have, and I have. Okay, so I have the thing that came in the latest version of Crotager. I have Hatton, and I have Red Factories, the new Red Factories. That's all the historical stuff I need. I'd kind of like to have Valor of the Guards. The only other one I really want is Blood Reef Taro. It goes for a ridiculous amount of money. I don't know that it's ever going to get reprinted. I suspect that if I ever going to get to play it, I'm going to play it with somebody that already has it, and I'm fine with that. I'm completely okay not having Blood Reef Taro. Valor of the Guards is more Stalingrad, so... And I will say that I've seen the package for Festung Budapest, and it's a really nice package as well. But I don't have the wherewithal to chase that stuff down. And I'm generally speaking, I'm fine waiting until stuff gets reprinted, or it doesn't, or it doesn't. Maybe the value goes down at some point, or maybe you get lucky. That happens sometimes too. On eBay, right? There was I might have mentioned this last week. So Outreach, I got that copy of Outreach for about $40. And it was nice. I mean, it's really nice. Now, when people like post Outreach in the flat, they're generally the prices are 100, 120, 150, 175, something like that. Now, these aren't auctions. These are flat prices that somebody's selling. And maybe they're selling them at this price, but I'm not going to pay that. I think that's ridiculous. So, somebody put it up as an auction, and I won it. It was like $40. Not after I had gotten it, but it was in transit still, in the vagaries of the post office nonsense. I had another copy had come up on eBay in the shrink wrap, in the flat tray, in the shrink wrap, and it started at $40 and ended up going for 77 or 78. Great price, fantastic condition. So it just happens sometimes that stuff happens to pop in at a great price. I saw a copy of Horse Soldiers, the I think TSR or 3W era GBACW game popped in for like $8 on eBay the other day. So John Langtry says he wants the 5th volume of Nigel Askey's Operation Barbarossa, the complete organizational and statistical analysis and military simulation. Is that a game or a book? I don't know what that is. I mean, I really feel like I've got room for a 1 or 2 map full East Front game, and I've kind of made my mind up that game is going to be Trial of Strength, because I really like Trial of Strength. For kind of the more operational scale, we have OCS. The occasional gamer, this is actually a blend. It is Johnny Walker Double Black tonight, and I'm actually glad that it's not, because I've kind of drunk a lot of it. So this is pretty much it for me right here. So we're going to go until this is empty. That's the plan. The I've actually got a rum that I might do next week. We are going to do. Okay, so next week we're going to do the Monday counter clipping stream again, and on Tuesday I hope to have another live stream for you at 8 p.m. So we'll see. That is not just me in on that. So stay tuned for that. I'll have an actual announcement up hopefully sometime this week. This COVID thing has fucked everything up. So what are you going to do? Who says, which module for ASL would you recommend to learn playing with? Beyond Valor for King Country or Yanks? And which scenario? I recommend starting with the starter kit. There are some... So you have to make a decision when starting to play ASL starter kit as to whether you want to advance to full ASL or not. And you could change your mind, right? That's fine. But you have to make that decision at some point. If you're going to move on to full ASL, then I recommend playing every scenario in the starter kits once or maybe twice. Play the 6 in the starter kit 1, play the next 6 in starter kit 2 with the guns, play the next 6 in starter kit 3 with the vehicles, then move on to starter kit 4, which has 6 or 8 scenarios, and do the Pacific, and then you're pretty much ready, right? To do simple ASL scenarios. The easy ones to run are the scenarios out of Beyond Valor, because there's a number of... So the key mechanics, the key infantry mechanics that aren't included in starter kit are concealment, which is now in starter kit 4, so you're getting that. But also bypass movement and snipers, okay? So basically you do all that stuff, you're done with starter kits, then start with the infantry-only scenarios in either Beyond Valor or Yanks, which are all very straightforward, but then you're adding, because you're playing with full ASL, you're adding bypass movement and snipers. And then you can basically just follow your own trajectory through that. Play a couple of those scenarios, then play another couple of scenarios with guns, play another couple of scenarios with vehicles, and look things up as you go. If you start, you can even teach yourself to do it if you start with starter kit, I think. Where learning directly from that giant ASL binder, that's not a viable... I mean, if you get somebody that knows what they're doing to teach you and mentor you, that's different. But if you're trying to just muscle your way through that giant binder rulebook, it's very difficult to learn how to play ASL from that rulebook. That rulebook is not structured that way. It is structured as a reference. And it's very good as a reference. It is not strong. It's not a strong rulebook to learn from. It's just not set up for that. There's plenty of... In the current, let me get some water here. Starting to get a little hiccupy. There are plenty of infantry-only scenarios in for King and Country too, and that's really the key point, right? You're going to full ASL. You're going to have some terrain types that you didn't have in starter kit, so you're going to have to read how those work. You're going to add a couple of additional rules, but like I said, the big ones are just concealment, snipers, and bypass movement. Those are the big ones. Those are really the ones that strongly affect play. A lot of the other things are just situational things, like, oh, this is a night scenario. Okay, so I got to learn the night rules. Well, you can just do that, right? Oh, this is an airdrop scenario. Got to learn the airdrop rules, for example, and they're fairly fussy, I got to tell you. A lot of people don't like the caves. A lot of people don't like the amphibious landing stuff. I actually kind of like that it's that you have the opportunity to do that. But I've never played in the Pacific, so I don't know how the cave stuff works. I'd like to see it at some point, but it's not in Starter Kit 4. That's like a super advanced, very deep end of the pool type of rules. But there's not that many scenarios that use caves, right? Just because it's in the Pacific doesn't mean you're using the cave rules. Aftermarket ASL company preferences. Bounding Fire Productions produces really good stuff. La Franc Terreur produces really good stuff. I don't have a high opinion of Critical Hit. I will tell you that. And I don't know that my opinion of Critical Hit is up to date. It might not be. Maybe they're doing a really good job with quality control now and playtesting and all that stuff. I don't have the impression that that's the case, but their reputation. They have a decades-long reputation in the third-party ASL community for doing slapdash, unplay-tested trash. So, Bounding Fire stuff looks really good. Even at Winter Offensive, there was Bounding Fire stuff on tables. Their Poland module looks really good. They have a Corregidor module, which I don't know if it's out, if it's coming, or what. That looks really good. Bounding Fire is doing some good stuff. At some point, ASL's kind of on the short list of stuff I want to play, because I've been trying for years, right? We actually have a local group that gets together at libraries once a month to play ASL here in Central Ohio. Well, that's in the toilet because of COVID. Thanks. So we're not able to do that anytime soon. So maybe we'll do some Solitaire video or something like that. Or if folks want to see outreach, maybe we'll do that. I don't know, but it's my goal to get some kind of play-by-play to the table pretty soon, or it might be one of the White Dog games. I got a pile of White Dog games waiting in the wings as well. And those are interesting in that you can very readily get the entire game on video and get it up in a reasonable amount of time, and it's not going to be 50 hours of video, right? There's also is it Ritterkrieg that does the play aids and stuff and the dice. I have no opinion on those. I don't have any of them, but they look nice. There's the people that do the flip charts. I think Multiman's going to do their own version of those, which I'll be happy to get. But I don't know anything about timetable on that. It would be super handy to have that little book of tables to not have to flip through the giant monster rulebook. It would be nice to have that. I think really, in a lot of ways, one of the things that I want Rising Sun for is that there's a historical module in that too, and it's. Those are really interesting in that you're playing on a custom map, right? That you're not, otherwise you're working with the standard geomorphic maps that are generic terrain. It's just more interesting to me to be playing on a map that more accurately reflects the terrain. There's always concessions when you're making these maps anyway, because they have to conform to whatever movement grid you're using, whether it's a hex grid or areas or whatever. But it's all... I'd like to be playing more of the historical stuff. But the historical stuff is for fully immersed ASL players, not clowns like myself. So, and I don't have... what's the historical starter kit module? Is... forget what it's called, but it's in Operation Market Garden, I can tell you that. And it's British versus Germans. So... and I'm happy to say there's a ton of Market Garden scenarios in the new version of King and Country. Now, as far as I know, as far as I could tell, the new version of King and Country, other than maybe they redid the art on the counters, is identical to the last version of King and Country. So that's good. There's a new, updated multi-man version of that module that the mature multi-man... multi-man did a previous version of Beyond Valor, for example, which I think was the one with... that included red barricades. Decision at Elst, that's the one I'm thinking of. But the current version of Beyond Valor is doesn't include that. But you can get, well, I don't know, can you still get red factories? I hope so. Because Stalingrad, that's like a really hardcore ASL experience, man, where you play this huge campaign game. They're not all, you could play smaller scenarios. But you're playing this huge campaign game on a dedicated map that was, just the factory complexes at Stalingrad. Really interesting to see. And as the Russians, you have to defend every inch. As the Germans, you have to root the Russians out of every single basement. It sucks as the Germans. I've actually played some red barricades years and years ago when I was playing a lot with really quite hardcore ASL guys, which I wasn't at the time, but I got to play a little bit of that. And of course, we've expanded the factory complex by double in the current version. So, okay, so I think we are at 9:53. We might as well go for another 10 minutes. So because I've been trying to keep these two right around 2 hours. So, I mean, Beyond Valor is like the core module. I mentioned in the For King and Country video that I really would like to see a revisiting of the questions raised by the way ASL is published. I would like to see just like a giant ass book of like scenarios 1 to 200, for example. I don't see any reason why that can't be done. As it is, I've had to like kind of put this piecemeal scenario collection together. I'd like to see you just be able to buy the OBs, right? And you know what? Don't make boxes. Just print wrap it, ship it out. I'd like to see a Chapter H book where you just get Chapter H, and you don't have to piece it together with pieces from different modules. Is something that was inherited from the way Avalon Hill was doing it. But Avalon Hill was doing it years ago when this was like the first time that Hollow Legions came out, right? We've now had, this would be the first new version of Hollow Legions in a long time, but there is some video on how to organize ASL stuff. Eventually, I will do a video on a Wargame storage video on ASL once I am satisfied with my own storage system and have made sufficient progress on it. It doesn't have to be done, but I'll tell you the trays I use. Those are these trays. I get these these are 32 compartment trays from the Container Store. You can get them through the mail. I don't know. I can tell you that they are made in Japan. And no, I'm wrong. They are made in Taiwan. So you might be able to look this up. Keyway, Keyway, plastic trays, number TL503. Here in the States, you can get these from the Container Store, and you can mail order them. This is DOS stuff, but I have 2 of these for every nationality, 3 for the U.S. And I'm not sure how I'm going to do the Swedes yet, because now I got Swedes to worry about, and in their own color. So Stigler, that's actually, there's a lot of truth to that statement. Stigler says he's always seen Squad Leader as a bunch of Chrome rules looking for a system to belong to. So here's the thing: if you played like ASL back in the day, right, and just out of the main box, it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. I mean, there's a thing that that John Hill was trying to say with that system, which is about command and control, right? But then they did Cross of Iron, and they did Crescendo of Doom, they did GI Anvil of Victory, and those additional modules added more and more stuff that didn't necessarily all work together. So at some point, they talk about this in the introduction to the ASL rulebook. They decided they were going to revise it, and it really ended up evolving into its own game. That is different in a lot of ways from the original Squad Leader, or the original Squad Leader plus Cross of Iron, or the original Squad Leader plus Cross of Iron and Crescendo of Doom. You get my point. But there is still a certain element of a piecemeal nature to that system because of the way it was originally published. Not holistically as one coherent design, but as a game system that was added to and added to and added to and made more and more complex over the course of several years. This is a thing that has happened to other game systems than ASL as well. One obvious example would be Starfleet Battles, which, yes, is a game that I play and like a great deal. I don't get to play it a lot, but I actually play more Starfleet Battles than I play Starfleet Battles a couple times a year. I don't play ASL that much. Let me put it that way. We always do Starfleet Battles at Winterfest, for example. And there's a local group, again, in the toilet now because of COVID, but there is a local group that meets monthly at the Soldiery to play Starfleet Battles. They're like the Columbus area's like longest meeting game group. Are these 5 guys that come every month to play Starfleet Battles, and hopefully we will get to do that again as well. But again, we gotta get COVID under control first. I had Conquer of Peeper 1. I never got 2, and it went away with all my ASL stuff. And then of course I got it again because I'm an asshole. Because we don't. My wife has very wisely given me the directive to not sell stuff because I will end up, in a lot of cases, I will end up buying it again. Which is why I won't say I stick to it 100% of the time, but of the stuff that's going, that's sitting upstairs waiting for me to be COVID-free, there's only about 2 things that are actually mine in there. Or everything else is that I'm positive I'm not going to play. And there's one other thing, which is Under an Iron Sky, which I'm still debating on whether I want to get rid of it or not. Maybe I don't, because if I don't, then I won't buy it again. And that's just a good idea. So, John Longshore says he doesn't play ASL, but he thinks of it as a first-class reference if he did World War II miniatures. So there's like a ton of really good vehicle reference information in Chapter H. That's by itself is worthwhile. Stigler asks, do I like Last 100 Yards take on the same level of combat? So I haven't played Last 100 Yards. I am hearing really, really, really positive stuff about it. And there is a second volume of Last 100 Yards goodies available now. So I don't have the wherewithal to pick it up at the moment, but you could still get both sets, and I would very much like to see it. It is it's an increasingly well-regarded system. On the other hand, I'm also a little bit tempted by GMT's new edition of Panzer, which is more of an armor-focused game. Because honestly, ASL's not really that good at armor, to be honest. It's in there and you can use it, but it's more of an infantry game, in my opinion. John, I'm not sure she's going to find that to be an appealing notion at all. As somebody that doesn't really wargame or get it. So, love you, dear. Yep. Occasional gamer had to purge wargames. That's not cool, but it happens too. I didn't dump anything. A lot of it's still in the storage unit, but all the critically needed stuff all the critically needed wargames are here now. I'm still trying to find the rest of the Traveler stuff. Most of my Mongoose Traveler stuff is somewhere, and it's in there, and I don't know where it is. Peter Bergs mentions we can learn a lot by going through the Starter Kit 1 scenarios multiple times. That's true. And the good news about those Starter Kit scenarios, unlike, say, those old Beyond Valor scenarios, is that they're relatively quick playing scenarios. Some of those Beyond Valor scenarios are rather long. Is there a Persian Gulf version of 1985 coming out from Thin Red Line? Yes. Okay, so the 1985 series started out with Under an Iron Sky, which is basically the same area of Central Europe that the next war covers. So it's Germany and Austria and Northern Italy and that, a little bit of France, Low Countries, that kind of place, Denmark. We also have Deadly Northern Lights, which is Scandinavia, pretty much all of Scandinavia. And the third volume is going to be called Sacred Oil, and it is going to deal with the Persian Gulf. So what map coverage it's going to have exactly, I'm not sure. Is it going to be like Iran, Persian Gulf, or is it going to be like Israel? It's Sacred Oil, so I assume Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, that type of area. We'll see. I don't know. They have the next game in their more tactical series, Dogs of War, that I think is available now. If it is like the rest of their product line, upon release it will instantaneously evaporate. So if you want to get it, I'm not ordering it, but if you want to get it, I recommend strongly that you get in on it as soon as possible. If I do not unload Under an Iron Sky, then I will be up for a new printing of Deadly Northern Lights, which should happen sometime in 2021. I think 2021. And then there's talk of a combined omnibus version of all 3 games together at some point in the indefinite far future, but we'll see. The third game's got to come out yet. So we'll see. If you remember, the Frank Chadwick Third World War had a Persian Gulf game, and it had its own card-based mini game that you would play before the war broke out, and that was basically the story of your Third World War. It was really neat, and I would love to see that again. That's a great game. Can't wait for that to come back out from Compass. Very pleased. I was just delighted when I heard that was coming, because a lot of really the GDW stuff that I'd really kind of like to have, that was at the top of the list. The GDW Wargame stuff. There's Traveler stuff, but that's a little different. And to be blunt, I have almost all of it already. There's 5 or 6 books maybe that I don't have that GDW did for either Classic Traveler or Mega Traveler, and for Traveler of the New Era, I have everything, including the novels and the T-shirt and the poster. So there's not much I'm missing from GDW for Traveler. We're going to have to do at some point. I'm going to probably not do it on a Monday. We're going to probably try to do a Traveler live stream too. So we'll see what happens. It might just be me talking about Traveler and RPGs and whatever. So maybe we'll do that next week. We'll see. Sometime around Friday or Saturday, I will settle on a topic for next Monday. So let me put it that way. So I would like to thank everybody for stopping by. We were up to 47 at peak tonight, and we have been hovering above 30 this entire time. So once again, you have my enormous thanks for just coming in and hanging around with me and chatting for a while. And I got less counters clipped than I usually do, but that's just because I didn't have as much ready as I usually do. So again, thanks very much for watching, and we will see you all next week. Everybody have a safe and sane rest of the week until then.